we're in Los Angeles. And so this should give you an idea of what the city-like areas of Los Angeles would traditionally look like before it was blown over with concrete. At the moment, we are in talks about the environment and how we've got to where we're at, and how we could possibly reverse it and make it a green place once again. A lot of folks are afraid of things like fire. Unfortunately, it's the conditioning of city life where we're taught to be afraid of the animals, we're taught to be afraid of the natural life, but in reality, we are nature. So I think the idea is getting back to that, and what that would look like would also include the cultural burns. We live in a time where everything needs a permit. Everything needs permission. If I am just to go and practice my culture in, let's say, a cultural burn, I could likely go to jail, get fined, get arrested. And so it's mending relationships or creating relationships with our agencies. When we can teach these agencies that our way of life is actually a good preventative measure to these scary, overgrown fires, then I think we can do some good work together.
You know, our relationship with plants is so deep. It has to be reciprocal, right? We have to ask permission before we take anything. We have to offer a gift. We have to let the plant know what it is that we need so that it can help us. And we need to make sure that we don't take too much from any one plant or any one area. The challenge that we as Tongva people and also other California tribal people who do not have a land base, the challenge that we face is the fact that all of the lands that are so key and important to us, that are still natural, belong to somebody. We're not able to access it, at least not without permits or without permission. So that's our challenge, is that there's so many spaces that should be natural, should be kept and allowed to grow the way it's supposed to. And it's being maintained by people who are disconnected.
One thing that people can really do to help the environment, especially here in Southern California and Baja California, is to no longer use smudge sticks, especially if you buy it. We still have a relationship with white sage, but it was originally a food source where we were able to gather seeds and other parts of the plant for food, and we can no longer do that because the demand for smudge sticks increased so much that white sage is now being poached from our original gathering grounds. White sage should always be a gift given openly after growing it and having a relationship with that sage. If you're buying it in bundles, you are not receiving that blessing, and you are appropriating our culture because you're exploiting our plant.
I think it's important for people to understand, coming from my community, a Tiat society, coming from a canoe family, our most important resource is our ocean. The ability to travel between our mainland and our islands, especially Catalina Island. And unfortunately, we're not able to fully embrace our maritime culture as traditionally we would because of our inability to do our crossings. A lot of our inability comes from the fact that our oceans are so contaminated, not only the acidity in the water that affects our canoes, which are made of redwood, which are made of natural resources, but also the fact that we have barges crossing through our waterways, our traditional freeways, how we get to cross through the water to get to our islands. It also affects our ability not only for us to take our canoes out, but also for the safety of our paddlers themselves.
I'm Bob Ramirez, and I am the president of the Gabrielino Tongva Springs Foundation, which is the preserve and protect, restore and revitalize Kuruvungna, the ancient village where we're sitting here on. And our goal is to educate the people as well about the Tongva, because this is a place where Kuruvungna means place where we gather in the sun. So we want to recreate the idea of a village where everybody is welcome and they can help and participate in the cleanup of the site, the maintenance of the site, the restoration, and learn about the ecology here and the native plants and animals and how they're woven together. So when they go back to their own homes and they go forward in life, they have a deeper understanding of the value of native people, native plants, native creatures, the entities, the relationships that we have that are based right here on this piece of land. This was for thousands of years a village inhabited by our people. And the descendants are still here. I think in our hearts when we come here, we feel a connection. That's why we're all here. I think we know this is our home. And even though we can't say we own it, because what does that mean? We do own it. This is land back.
Hi, I'm Coretta Anderson, and I'm the Senior Manager of Influencer Marketing and Strategic Partnerships at Earthjustice, and I'm based in Los Angeles. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am wearing a long sleeve denim button-up shirt, and I'm a Black woman with big curly afro hair. In my role at Earthjustice, I focus on building purpose-driven partnerships with creatives, change makers, and community builders to elevate awareness around environmental issues and awareness around the work Earthjustice does in partnership with our clients and communities. I'm joined today by my colleague, Jessica Knoblauch.
Hi, I'm Jess Knoblauch. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the senior writer at Earthjustice. I'm wearing a pink and black dress, and I have long curly blonde hair. And in my role at Earthjustice, I seek out stories about environmental issues that our attorneys and partners are working on. And I tell those stories in our print magazine and in our blog. And I am based in Portland, Oregon.
Jess and I are excited to be here today. We'll be discussing with you the Earthjustice Storytelling Project, LIT, Stories from the Frontlines of Climate Justice. But before we begin, for those of you who may not be familiar with Earthjustice, we are the world's premier nonprofit public interest environmental law firm. We go to court to protect people and the planet. Earthjustice wields the power of law and the strength of partnership to protect people's health, to preserve magnificent places and wildlife, to advance clean energy, and to combat climate change. With 15 offices across the U.S. and an international program, we represent clients big and small in their collective fight for a just, equitable, healthy, and sustainable world. As our tagline says, we're here because the earth needs a good lawyer. We are so honored to contribute to this important conversation on climate storytelling. Our world is defined by the stories we tell. And for too long, those in power have told a fanciful story that even though the U.S. is the richest country in the world, that we can't afford to acknowledge, much less address, the intersecting crises of climate change, systemic racism, and extreme inequality. Historically, major environmental organizations have also largely failed to connect these crises while centering a white dominant viewpoint that erased those who didn't look like a typical environmentalist. It's time to write a new story. And that's why Earthjustice created LIT, a climate justice storytelling project that connects the dots between climate change, systemic racism, and extreme inequality, while highlighting the women, men, youth, LGBTQ+, Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples around the world who are tackling them. Jess was Earthjustice's creative driving force behind LIT. And so my first question for you, Jess, is how did this project come to exist? What was the development process like? And how did it define or include your vision of equitable storytelling?
Yeah. So thanks for that question, Coretta. LIT came about in early 2020 after youth climate activists like the Sunrise Movement successfully shifted the climate conversation from dealing with climate change as a single issue to really tackling it as a systemic issue that it truly is. And so the Sunrise activists and other activists drew their inspiration from past environmental justice work. And they argued that, like many justice issues, the climate crisis is rooted in historic racism and extreme levels of inequality. Because the climate crisis is a systemic problem, they presented a systemic solution. It was one that's hopeful and visionary and all-encompassing, and which by now most people know as the Green New Deal. And this climate frame really inspired a lot of people, myself and my Earthjustice colleagues included. And so we sought to bring a similar positive and intersectional frame to our own climate messaging.
And how did you go about achieving this positive, interconnected frame?
So we did it in three ways. One, we sought out stories that specifically connected the dots between the climate crisis and other societal issues like worker injustice, racial injustice, inequality, etc. And then we put people on the ground fighting these issues at the forefront of the storytelling. We specifically wanted to keep mentions of Earthjustice and Earthjustice's work in the background because we felt like Earthjustice already has such a big microphone. We really just wanted to use it to amplify other visionary climate leaders. And finally, we really steered climate change storytelling. I remember one of my colleagues, Allison, saying to the team early on how she wanted to tell stories about ways that people are able to step in and step up for their community. And that really stuck with me, and it helped really guide our storytelling throughout.
I love that. Okay, let's get into some of these stories. There were 10 in total. What inspired these features?
Yeah, so one story idea that we talked about really early on was inspired by the feelings and anxiety that the storytelling team, many of whom were millennials and Gen Z themselves, were feeling in this moment. And we ended up calling it the climate grief piece. And as the author described it, it was a piece that basically ended up being like a vibe check for what it feels like to be paying attention to this world at this particularly devastating moment in history, particularly as a young person. And so we found a young and upcoming activist named Marcella Maholland who wrote this amazing first person climate grief essay. And in the piece, she talked about her own journey starting out as a climate activist. She expressed how it felt to know that her generation may never enjoy all the wonderful places and experiences that other generations are used to enjoying because of climate change, because of greed, because of what racism, because of what all these things have done to the country. And she talked about how she copes with this grief. And more importantly, I think it left people feeling inspired to find strength in helping others. I'm excited to see if it inspires kids in other countries to write their own climate grief stories. So, another example of the stories that we told was about an activist in Florida named Crystal Johnson. And back in 2017, when Hurricane Irma hit Florida, um, Crystal had this experience where she went to the local community center to get help, only to find the doors locked that day. And so she decided to take matters into her own hands. And so we tell the story of her along with other members of the community um, doing just that, basically. They set up a makeshift aid site, they distributed food to local families, and she got on social media to share updates about where people could get supplies, where they could get water, things like that. And as the word spread about the community resources, more residents started showing up to help. And so I feel like Crystal's story is a great example of exactly what our team members were asking to see on the Lit project, which was stories about ways that people are able to step in and step up for their community and inspire others to do the same.
I love that Crystal Johnson story. So, having been developed during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, how did that influence the trajectory of the stories that were chosen?
As far as the production, so right as we began assigning stories, COVID hit basically around the same time. And suddenly it was impossible to have photographers meet story subjects in the field to take photos of people. It just wasn't safe. And at the same time, small businesses and artist communities were really struggling because of the shutdown. And so we took this as an opportunity to think differently about the artwork for these stories. And we ultimately landed on creating illustrated portraits for each of the 10 stories. And this did two things. It really helped support the artist community, and it brought a particular richness to the storytelling. On top of all of that, I feel like it added an extra level of intimacy to the project. Our amazing design guru, Rob, spent a lot of time and care seeking out illustrators who shared backgrounds or shared interests with the story subjects. So again, it just added this extra level that I really appreciated. And in addition to the artwork being impacted by COVID, so were the stories themselves. For example, one of the stories we told for the series was about Amazon warehouses and the people who work and live near these warehouses. The storytelling itself was really impacted by COVID. At that time, Amazon was experiencing record sales because people needed to order stuff online. And, there's a lot of love for companies who could get people in a safe way, which is totally valid. But at the same time, what was being lost in that story was the intense toll that these industries put on the communities that they're based in. It's easy to kind of forget about them when you're getting stuff like free shipping and, the stuff that you want online. It's easy to forget or even not see the way that these giant warehouses can negatively impact the communities that they're based in. And so we wanted to shine a light on that. And so the way we did this was we focused on a warehouse hub in the Inland Empire, which is about an hour east of LA. And people who live there are constantly breathing in black smoke from diesel emissions coming from the company's trucks. They're kept awake in the middle of the night by, the constant rumble of semis passing by, the high-pitched whir of cargo planes flying overhead. And even worse, some of these residents, or many of them even, who live near the warehouses, also work at the warehouses. And we've all heard the stories about, Amazon warehouses being really hard places to work at, described as soul crushing, even in some outlets. So people who work and live near these warehouses face constant harm, and we wanted to tell their story. And I think finally, we wanted to make it clear that Amazon, who's owned by one of the richest people in the world, is more than capable of making life better for both its employees and the communities that the warehouses are based in. Workers and climate activists have made several basic and achievable demands to Amazon, including things like paying workers better and upgrading to zero emissions trucks so that there's less air pollution in the communities. And I think these things are completely achievable. It's just a matter of, people pushing hard enough to get them.
What was the response to the series?
The project really prompted the organization to reflect and interrogate how we talk about intersectional justice issues. We learned that for some members of the public, there's just a lack of understanding about how environmental issues like climate change or air pollution are often exacerbated or even rooted in racial and economic injustice. We've had conversations both internally and with our partners and clients to ask them how to show up and be a better ally and partner with them. And I think the Lit Storytelling Project has helped play a huge role in that process. And so I feel like Lit pieces underscored the idea that this isn't about just one person changing a light bulb. It's about banding together and demanding systemic change. And as Marcella said in her climate grief piece, none of us can go it alone if we want to make big change possible.
Amazing. So what's next? Will we see a second edition of Lit?
So I don't know that we'll see a second edition of Lit, although I wouldn't take it off of the table. But what I can say is that the handprint of this storytelling project can now be seen across the organization. I feel like Lit really helped inform a creative foundation for recognizing explicitly that racism and social injustice are at the roots of environmental problems that we're trying to address, and that environmental justice is not separable from racial and social justice. And the explicitness around intersectional justice messaging is so much more pronounced now than even just a few years ago at Earthjustice. And I'm so glad to have the Lit Project be a part of that evolution.
I am as well. It is an amazing project, and I'm so grateful to the entire team and to you.
Thanks, Coretta.
Of course. Thank you again, Jess, for joining me today. And thank you again to the Hollywood Climate Summit for this invitation. We are so honored and proud to be a part of this event and wish you all a great day.